Hello there, good evening. Um, well, my partner's running a bit late because he's got some technical issues. There he is. I'll add him in a second. There we go. How are you doing, man?
That's good. Just had a slight technical issue before I joined, but it's all working now, so that's great.
Yeah. No, I mean, aside from the slight electrical buzz. Oh dear, there we go. Well. How are you doing now? Can you hear me? You got
Sorry,
you got
Rob.
connection there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Coming through. Yeah, all right. So, in the sweltering heat, we are now doing the first of a regular stream series on sort of, big news items that are related to the Cape independence and, the sort of big picture stuff in South Africa as well. And I thought we'd try and narrow it down to three main topics, although there's some other little things that we can mention. And the first item is actually, Pretoria's big shift in international relations. That's a pity. Anyway, let's start with the obvious. So, Naledi Pandor. Oh dear. Anyway. Okay, after all of those lovely hiccups, I'm just going to get straight into that. I thought Robert King was having the problems. It turns out I'm having my own.
I think it's improved now. I think it's getting closer to the router should improve the situation.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it quickly. So the first thing that we need to mention is what the United States has done in response to recent developments in South Africa. So we've had, for a while now, we've had a sort of ambivalent relationship with the West. And recently with the Ukraine war, South Africa took a really interesting stance where in public they pretended to be sort of non-partisan, non-aligned, we abstained from the vote. And then in private, they held sort of like a big cocktail bash at the Russian embassy the night before the invasion.
Yeah, Cameron Duggan was in attendance, I remember.
Yeah. It might be a bit premature considering the repercussions of what they're going to do. So I think, look, at the moment, what the US has done in response seems kind of weak. But I think just for the sake of...
Well, I think we should just make it very clear what the US has done. Because actually, this is not the US government that's passed this resolution. Currently, this is only a proposed resolution in the US Congress being put forward by what seems to be only Republican Congress members. No Democrats, as far as I know, have supported this resolution. However, you never know if Democrats will come along because this could be an issue that garners bipartisan support. But it does seem like the Democrats are going to be more hesitant, I think, to openly criticize South Africa than the Republicans are. So we'll just have to see how things proceed with that. But it's definitely got some really interesting consequences for South Africa and the Cape in general.
Yeah, because I noticed the congressmen who sponsored the bill, they're not like big names. And most of them are sort of these safe seat picks from the Republican Party. So I think they're sort of, they're sort of like the Republican equivalent of your average cadre.
Well, I
So
think
that
the person proposing it, John James, I think that's his name. He was, from what I know, he was I think, a Senate candidate in Michigan. He was the Republican nominee for Senate in 2020, and he narrowly lost that campaign. I think he was one of those election deniers for a short period of time, trying to overturn the election result in his race there. And then I think before that, he was also the governor candidate in Michigan. So I think in certain areas, he might have quite a bit of influence. But yeah, it definitely seems there's no real big names on that list that have supported it yet. We'll have to see how many more Republicans will join the resolution in the coming weeks.
Yeah, because I mean, there was an article recently, News 24 put out that said, from speaking to Durko, and for any of you foreigners, that's basically our, foreign branch, they basically said that they spoke to Lindsey Graham, and he said, "Nah, it's not even going to pass the Security Committee." So it seems to me like that's kind of dead in the water. However. It seems to me that one can't rule out something happening in the future because remember how sort of stiffly the United States strong-armed a whole bunch of other states for not coming. They even threatened India with sanctions for not voting with them. So I imagine that as things progress, if South Africa loses their plausible deniability, then they're going to be hit quite hard. I think, but I think the thing is, we're not as dependent on things like U.S. aid for survival. U.S. trade, we are going to sort of
especially in the Cape.
suffer.
I think they're our second biggest trade partner. I think the US is after China.
It is. Are you? I mean, I haven't looked at I haven't looked at the trade stats for a while, but I was sure it was. The EU is sort of bigger, but.
Well, I guess
think,
the EU. I guess if you take them as the United Trade Bloc they are, then they might exceed the US. But I think by individual country standards, I think it's the United States. Westgrow has a table on this.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, but then again, one must remember, like the EU, they tend to vote they tend to sort of go with whatever the United States is doing, and I mean, increasingly so. I mean, the deal that they struck with NATO, where basically they subordinated all of their powers for making independent decisions in defense and foreign policy to NATO. That was quite remarkable. That's a major kowtow. But I mean, I thought it would be fun to just quickly read through the little draft resolution that they have, just for the sake of a giggle.
Okay.
Let's see.
Are you going to screen share it?
Yeah. Hold on.
Yeah, I did a short video on this on TikTok a few days ago, and there were two very interesting aspects to it, which I found. I think in part in the resolution somewhere they condemn the South African government for load shedding, being unable to, provide power to the citizens, as they put it, and then they raise concerns about the ANC's the ANC trying to build a surveillance state. That's also another aspect in the resolution.
Oh yeah, no, that's very big. So let's just go through it. Okay, formalities, and then the resolution. It's really relatively short, so it's not going to take too long. But opposing the Republic of South Africa's hosting of military exercises with the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation, and calling on Biden's administration to conduct a thorough review of the United States-South Africa relationship. So whereas the United States and the Republic of South Africa have enjoyed strong bilateral relations since 1994, whereas holding of elections with universal suffrage in 1994 marked the effective ending of apartheid in South Africa, the codified state-enforced system of racial segregation and socioeconomic discrimination, and whereas South Africa is the United States' largest trade partner in Africa with $21 billion of two-way goods trade in 2021, and in 2012, the country signed a trade and investment framework facilitating two-way trade. So it's like, are you not grateful enough? And whereas the United States is the largest source of foreign direct investment in South Africa, valued at 7.5 billion in 2021, and approximately 600 American businesses operate in South Africa. Well, that's something. Whereas South Africa's media
How large
landscape
are
has
these
proven.
businesses, I wonder?
I
Because
mean, that's
surely
a
there's
good
a lot
question.
more than 600 businesses.
I mean, look, I imagine some of it's doubling up because you get all these big companies that make little LLCs to deal with like their property divisions and things like that. So, there's some doubling up there. And also, it tends to be like
And it
large
can,
companies. I know Pepsi bought out sort of Tiger Brands, and then you've got like all of your big sort of fast food chains. You've got
well, Macro's owned by Walmart.
yes, the Massmart buyout. That was a big one. A lot of people. I remember Zwelinzima Vave kicking up a huge fuss back in the day when that deal went through. But I think Zuma must have gotten a cut or something because he was very happy. So who knows? You know. But I think the thing is that they say. I mean, the interesting thing is they say South Africa's media landscape has proven resilient to the influence of media entities controlled by the People's Republic of China. Now, I find that really interesting because News 24 is subject to interference from China, mainly because their parent company Naspers has a major share in Tencent. And as a result, they are now they're a national security sort of issue and have to be monitored. So I imagine that there are some a few little red lines that they don't like them crossing. But yeah, I mean, like Media 24 is pretty bloody big, and they've got divisions all across the continent. So I'd be surprised if it's as true as they're
Well, yeah, I
saying. I
mean,
think
do we see many articles about China in the South African press, really, especially Chinese involvement in our economy? Maybe in
yeah,
the Daily
no, I mean,
Maverick, maybe they're freer, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I don't remember the last time I saw an article about China's involvement in South Africa in News 24.
I mean, that's true. I mean, look, Daily Maverick and Mail and Guardian are owned sort of by. They're funded by the Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, and there's like a couple of sprinkling of other sort of big Western entities.
And
I
the
think
Daily
one
Maverick's
of the,
also affiliated with the Guardian in the UK as well. They're part of the Guardian's Africa network.
yeah. That's the gate. There's a big Gates operation behind them. So they'll sort of be tucked into sort of the fringes of the Trusted News Initiative, which is why they've been so very disciplined in sticking to mainstream Western narratives. I think that's part of the thing is that you've got these big sort of investigative journals that they have talented senior journalists who work for them. They've got they've got a reasonably sized readership. And yeah, I mean, for sort of the professional classes, your big newspapers that you're going to be following are, well, it's going to be those two. So it's Times Live, and now increasingly Biz News is creeping up. But Alec Hogg is very sort of garden variety liberal conservative. So yeah, or conservative liberal, however you want to put it, I guess. So yeah, I think they have a kind of point there. But I think that in terms of resilience, I think it's more that China doesn't seem all that pertinent. There are some sort of news items related to Chinese influence in South Africa that just sort of get they don't hit the airways as hard as I'd imagine. I mean, I would have thought it'd be much more of a scandal that we have a Chinese citizen sitting in the parliament as a member of the ANC, or that we have
Yeah, that was a
Chinese
bizarre story,
oversight.
wasn't it? I mean,
Right,
I
it's
don't think
very, very
they
bizarre.
said they. Well, look, I did some research on that person. They were somewhat. I think they were part of the Chinese South African Business Association, which was a CCP controlled organization before they got into the parliament. But I think they were saying at the time it was so bizarre because this. I think this MP didn't know any of the indigenous African languages. They only knew English, which for the ANC was quite
Hmm.
bizarre.
Yeah, no, I mean, but yeah, I mean, like even the white guys in the ANC know at least one, Bantu language because you can't fit in unless you know something, Anyway, but I mean, I think it was very obvious that she's sort of a monitoring, presence. I think the other thing that I noticed is interesting that sort of got passed over. It was passed around social media a lot, but in terms of news, very very little. But I remember some years ago they started having the Chinese inspect our military infrastructure, our military, and they had what's it called? They started these Chinese police co-op units. So basically, what had happened is that there were enough homicides of Chinese citizens and robberies and things like that. The embassy made a bit of a fuss. So South Africa basically gave them priority treatment in certain areas. So they'll get like a police station. Sure, it's South African police, whatever, but now they must learn Mandarin because the Chinese will not learn any native language, not even English. The communities that they're talking about, that they're serving, and so then they get made sure that they get given priority treatment in their own language, and they've got oversight from Chinese police personnel. So and they've got apparently this is a very broad initiative. They've got more than 100 of these around the world, programs like this around the world. Where they sort of gently press local police into looking after their citizens as a priority. I think that's also kind of a concerning development, but no one seems to really mention it. I think
Rob, I'm just going to interrupt you there quickly. I'm just going to shift over to another device quickly because I've got some issues here. It's going to take 10 seconds because I've already got the StreamYard thing set up on my other device. But I'll just cause quite a small break there.
Alrighty then. Okay, we'll see what happens. Remove and oh, there you are. Okay. Oh, that's much better. That's a nice crisp audio. So here we go. Where are we? Back to the list. So I mean, what else do they mention? The thing that I can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay.
Sounds good. One of the things that sort of cropped up that I wasn't aware of is that so South Africa's been having sort of planned military exercises with the United States that it has recently turned down. So I mean, there's one called Shared Accord from 2022, and then South Africa has now declined to participate in the planned Cutlass Express military exercises in 2023. So that was interesting because this is because up till now, as I said, there's been the pretense of non-partisanship, but now it's sort of like because the same military drill with the same ships was held in 2019 in South Africa, and everyone was like, it's probably nothing. I mean, like ISS did an article on it, but it didn't really, there wasn't really much to say.
Well, it was pre-Ukraine war, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But now it's different. I mean, not only is it post-Ukraine war, but they're also saying no to the Americans. So this could get interesting. So he says, and then another big thing that they notice is South Africa often voted in alignment with the PRC within the United Nations General Assembly in 2022, especially in relation to votes condemning Russia's unjustified and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. So yeah, I mean that's part of the course. I mean, South Africa's been voting like the same way as like an old third worldist Cold War power since time immemorial, and I'm surprised people are surprised. Really, I mean, this is a Marxist party, admittedly a Marxist party, an anti-Western party, admittedly so. And it strikes me as just bizarre that people are constantly surprised by their behavior.
Well, I think what a lot of the foreign, mostly I would say white political classes are realizing the same thing that a lot of our local political classes realized just a few years ago, is that what the ANC actually is. I mean, this whole notion that they are this liberation movement that's just been fighting to, free the people of South Africa. I think it's being exposed to them that this is just a complete and total fraud. And look, and we might start to face the consequences of that now. Yeah, I mean, look, remember this, as I said, this is a Republican resolution, so the noise we're hearing from the Democrats on this is still quite mute. And even after the Ukraine invasion, we did see Biden really happily invite Cyril to the White House, and it was all smiles and celebrations. And then remember, I think even just at the end of last year, the United States, the UK, Germany, all these Western countries gave us billions and billions of dollars for our renewable energy transition. So, on one hand, they're starting to get irritated with us, but they're still sending the money our way.
I mean, like the interesting thing that I wonder whether it's because, I mean, like I heard, it must have been like a year or two ago, but there were comments, there was some. I actually cannot remember what event it was, but I was watching Democratic representatives, and I don't know if this. I think this was in some committee because I remember the building layout, and it certainly didn't look like the Congress or the Senate. But the representative was talking about how they should be basing their diversity, equity, inclusion policies on South Africa, which has shown tremendous success. Which, I mean, like, just a remarkable sort of way of thinking. And
well, we've seen this in a lot of your writing, the concerns that many of these Western countries are following the same pathways that South Africa took just a few decades ago. With that, and I'm actually seeing now the right in America, like especially a lot of these conservative activists, pointing to South Africa, looking at the disasters that are emerging in this country, and warning their American followers that they could be facing a very similar outcome in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think honestly, it's kind of exaggerated. I mean, the people forget the United States has just so much wealth. I mean, and if you look at and while there's a lot of these infrastructural accidents and things, the United States' general infrastructural health is way, way better than anybody gives it credit for. And I think particularly on the dissident right, you get a lot.
They're very much in debt they've definitely got a massive infrastructure problem at the moment. From what I've heard, I think it's something like $20 trillion that actually they need to upgrade all their infrastructure in the country to be at a very high standard at the moment. I mean, it is on that. I mean, it is. Look, they've got a far way to. South Africa is on the African continent. It's a third world country. It's not like the US. But the thing is, America's a lot farther to fall. That's
Yes.
That's a fact. But I mean, it can follow the same trajectory without ending up in the same ending, pretty much. So it can go.
Well, this is sort of what I think is. I mean, this is sort of what I think is that it's going to take America, if they keep on the same trajectory, it's still going to take them a really, really long time to get as bad as we have, like a really long time. So the likelihood that it's something that's imminent for them it's unlikely. They're going to have to suffer under a functioning left-wing government for much longer because they have the accumulated economic wealth. And the same goes for Western
federalism,
Europe.
We don't.
Yeah, this is true. And I think a good example of sort of where these things go for a rich country, the United Kingdom has reached a point where nearly 50% of its economy is the government. And
in France, it's something like 60%.
Yeah, it's getting quite brutal, and it creates a sort of sclerosis. You can't really reform anything. You can't. Nothing runs efficiently, at least not by the standards that one would expect them to, given where the country is. And I mean, like your GDP per capita in the UK has now fallen as low as it's like nearly down to where Romania is. So
yeah, I did see Keir Starmer warning that the UK is at risk now of lagging behind Poland when it comes to living standards. So yeah, you're seeing that that cost of living crisis there really kicking in.
Yeah, No, I mean, I think it's. I mean, look, the open borders policy is the big one for me because you let in a huge number of people who are net negative for the fiscus, and you create these profound social disruptions. I mean, the recent ruckus in there's one in Dover where a girl was raped and the
There
boys
were
were not.
protests in Liverpool.
No, Dover.
No, but Liverpool as well. I mean,
Yeah,
one of the most left-wing cities in the UK, and they were having, a small-scale riot over the fact that there had been, I think, attempted groomings of girls in that city. So it's definitely a situation that is prone to worsening quite drastically. And I think it's
yeah.
something like 50,000 people are projecting a year coming across the channel. Then that's just illegal migration across the channel. I mean, illegal migration is actually a far bigger problem than that. And then you've got also legal migration on top of that, which is something like nearly a million
Yeah,
a
what?
year net coming
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah. The net migration last year, according to official statistics, was over 500,000. Because there's also a lot of people who leave the country.
Yeah, yeah.
So you got a lot of British expats who are buggering off to Dubai and Spain and France and the United States and so on. And so these things. The thing is, people sort of forget what it was like watching the transition in South Africa from the way it used to be to the way it is now. And the thing is, there were whole areas where you had towns which were, as a whole town, white. And so you saw this complete transformation of society where people who were a majority in their own communities now became this tiny minority very rapidly. I think, like for the British, it's happening slow enough that it's not like a literal overnight phenomenon, but it is really rapid. And they're going to be facing some of the tensions we're facing, and the fact that they're raising everyone who comes, pushing everyone through this sort of school system that's and media sort of environment where all of these progressive ideas are pushed. You're lining up the immigrants to hate the natives, which is just it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I mean,
And I
look,
mean, we know
as a
this here.
society, you need something to bind the society together. So you need at least, whether it be
Hmm,
culture or ideology or something like that, that at least people can unite behind. That's required for a functioning society. That's why, for example, in Irania, we see that as quite a successful experiment because they've got a unified culture there, they've got a unified ideology, and that's why they're quite a successful community. They've got those common values. But as you
yeah.
see, we see mass migration without any form of assimilation or integration into the country, and you effectively see people. I think the term was people leaving behind a nationality without gaining a new one in the UK. Then you're going to start to see some serious social tensions break out, and it's also a new phenomenon because you can have successful diverse societies. I think the Cape is a good example of that. But that was a diverse society that was formed over centuries, and there were difficulties in forming that diverse society. I mean, in the UK, we're talking about, especially with mass migration. I mean, it was really prior to 2000. I mean, net migration was on average below 100,000 a year, and now it's, I think, every year since 2000 it's exceeded 100,000. So it's those tensions that are going to boil over as time continues.
And I mean, we got a similar problem to them down here in the Cape, whereas because we have this party that we vote for very consistently. So, like the UK is for almost for like 3/4 or something, or 4/5 of the time that they've been governed since the end of the Second World War, they've been governed by the Conservative Party. And the Conservative Party have been the ones ramming through all of the progressive reforms. The birth of the welfare state and the rise of comprehensive schools, the shuttering of the grammar schools. That was Margaret Thatcher. You have Tony Blair comes in and does his magic, smashing up all the institutions, and then what is Cameron doing? Consolidate. And so now we've got this thing in the Western Cape where we're voting for what's supposed to be a sort of liberal conservative party called the Democratic Alliance, who then goes about deciding, how we'll win votes is we'll go into all of the new illegal settlements that are popping up everywhere, and we'll build permanent infrastructure for them, on the back of our core voters' municipal rates. Which, I mean, it really is an extraordinary way to go about things. I think I think the other aspect that I picked up on, I mean, like we all know, I think everyone who's listening to this will probably be aware of the Fishhook High School incident with, where they implemented sort of a critical race theory program to re-educate all the students, and basically sent the most rabid sort of quasi-genocidal lunatic to instruct them on how they're demon spawn who don't deserve to be to draw breath. And the thing is that the teachers in the school didn't like this at all. This was something direct from the Western Cape Education Department, and no one has been fired, no one has been censured. It's just it's despicable, actually. And I mean, like, I spoke to a fellow who's fairly high up in the party, but he's not from the Cape. He's from the East, and he I got him in his DMs. I'm not going to say who it is because I told him I'd be discreet about it. But I asked him about this, and he's just like, "Well, we're not aware. We're not really. I'm not really aware of what's going on over there. I know Debbie Schaefer, and I don't think that she would implement something like that." And then I said, "But this was her bill; it had her name on it. Why was this implemented?" And she says, "Well," he says to me, "Well, I don't think that they really read the documents that they're putting out." I said, "Like, I mean, are you kidding me? Like, you this is your flagship product. I'm education MEC, like." And then just like rubber stamp whatever some tit is working out of your office somewhere down the corridor. And I mean, this is the kind of thing that results. I spoke to, so there's that councillor. I mean, we met her in a Gullis. So I mean, I spoke to her about this, and she said one of the things that she said is that they don't. The party deliberately introduces, and the same thing you see in like the United States Congress or whatever. So it's not like it's a novel invention or anything, but the party deliberately introduces sort of municipal bills and things like that in a way that no one has time to read them. You just got to pass them because the caucus said so. I mean, for crying out loud.
I think there's a problem with our electoral system. I mean, with our system, we basically rob councillors of having any ability to act as an individual. You've got to vote along with the caucus. I think, especially for ward councillors who are elected as the individual, not necessarily as a party, if they go against a party decision, they can be expelled from the party. And I think that is a challenging aspect of our democracy. You can't vote with your conscience. You have to vote what sometimes the national party tells you how to vote on a local issue, and that's definitely something that I think anyone can recognise as quite anti-democratic.
Yeah, I mean, forget anti-democratic. It's just antithetical to any kind of responsible government. I mean, you know me. I'm not here to wave the banner for democracy exactly, but there has to be some kind of responsible mechanism where people are held accountable.
Well, you can't claim to be a federalist party and then have the national party dictating on local issues, like to councillors how to vote. It's the complete opposite of federalism.
But I mean, like one of the sort of upsides of this has been, I mean, like personally, I'm not emotionally invested in Russia or Ukraine. I have a slight favor. I like the fact that things are actually working out kind of poorly for the West at the moment, mainly because it creates this opportunity to exploit little gaps. That's my personal perspective. But
it really is a stalemate at the moment, it seems. At the moment,
yeah, that's what it looks like. I mean, look, unless Bakhmut falls, which I mean, like, I no matter who I follow on Twitter or YouTube or newspapers or whatever, I can never know what the hell's going on day to day unless there's like a major shift. So I'm holding on to my seat, but look, the way I see it is this is giving the ANC enough courage to make sort of very rash moves in international relations. I'm happy with that, because what it is it's sort of setting up a situation where the United States is going to have to make a move. But the United States does not have the capacity to do a color revolution in South Africa. It's just not going to happen. Because, I mean, everywhere else that they do this, there's always there's like an NGO infrastructure, and there's what's it called? Like people are plugged into the media and what have you. But in South
The
Africa,
population,
it's
I mean, we're just so apathetic over here. Voter
no,
turnout's
it's
collapsed.
low trust. It's low trust. Like nobody trusts anything. You tell people to get up off their seats and do something political, and they're like, "Nah, bro, we've seen political change before. This shit is whack." There's this very sort of distrusting vibe here, and
well, I think people have been told by the media so many times of this, Ramaphosa new dawns. Like we've had so many new dawns. I mean, 1994 was a new dawn. Ramaphosa.
I just want to clarify something. I just want to clarify something quickly, because someone in the chat who I know from Twitter has asked a clarifying question. It's just, I didn't say there's no NGO infrastructure in South Africa. I'm just saying there isn't an NGO infrastructure that commands an army of activists that could stir anything up. And I mean, additionally, who would you go to be your vehicle for national government if you're the United States? You have the Democratic Alliance, happy for you, but then what leverage does the DA have? How much leverage could you really give them? At the end of the day, South Africa has the option of China and Russia. They have the option of trading with all these people. And there's only so much you can really punish us. I mean, I think one of the big things that you can see looking at the way South Africa's government is that the ruling party is willing to tolerate, and their voters as well, are willing to tolerate extraordinary levels of degradation and so on. So I think, I mean, look, it is a bit of a problem. Well, I mean, what it means is if you're the United States and you find it necessary to sort of intervene in South Africa, and you want to sort of maintain the waters down here, clear for passing ships, or you want to you want to sort of disrupt access to minerals or something, your only options really are to kind of go for the Cape and go for Mozambique. Because as I see it, it's like, I think that's partially the reason that the West are so invested in Cabo Delgado, is because if they can get Mozambique on side, I mean, that'll be a big trick if they manage that. Because again, those are much more hardcore sort of Marxist types than the ANC are. However, if they can get those guys on side, then what they can do is they can ratchet up the pressure in Maputo and force South Africa to depend entirely on Durban. And then you've got the issue of the complete insecurity of the national highway that links the core to Durban. So I mean, I just recently read a book on the unification of South Africa, and a very sort of deep dive on those little 10 years. And one of the big tensions there when they were first just like a customs union was that there was competition in terms of customs and rail duties between the coastal provinces, Natal and the Cape, and Transvaal, where all of the minerals were. And what happened is that very briefly, the trade went through Maputo more than it did through Durban for about I think it was not even a year. But there was a brief moment where, because of that sort of relative competition between the different ports, you actually got the threat of a breakup of South Africa, and that's actually what precipitated the acceleration of the union. So you can see the same dynamic play out today. It's really about the main geostrategic factor about South Africa is the main economy is in the core of the country, and it's far from the ports. And so there are three natural ports you could send your goods out from, and that's Cape Town, Durban, and Maputo. I mean, there's a bit through Richards Bay for the coal terminal and so on, but at large, it's really those three big sort of hubs. So if if the United States can sort of control Maputo, they can really isolate South Africa. And I think that I think that South Africa holding together in the long term is, without control of those two ports, is really poor.
Another point to add is just that our domestic ports have also had seen their infrastructure collapse. So that's why you see all these backups at the ports of exported produce. So that also adds additional challenges for South Africa.
Look, that's a combination of factors, really. It's part of it's electricity, so because you do need cold storage. Part of it's road security. It's a huge concern from the industry. So you get a lot of truck hijackings, you get a lot of racketeering. But another issue is that the unionization on the docks is really, really bad. The stevedore industry is a little bit different, mainly because it's run by a cartel. And if you want to, for example, become a stevedore, run a stevedores company, you have to. But the legislation demands that you have to ask permission from a board called NASASA, which is the National Association of Stevedores, much like how you would for if you want to do fire or emergency or whatever, or if you want to have a university that certifies engineers or whatever, you have to speak to this professional body, right? Except the professional body is run out of the office of someone from Grindrod, or Grindrod, I think it's pronounced, which is the one of our biggest sort of legacy companies. And I found this out because I was really struggling to grasp what was happening in the ports. And so I called up this guy who's kind of a veteran in the industry, and he'd been struggling to start his own stevedoring company. And he goes to the department. And he says, "Well, how do I contact NASASA? Because I have to get them, whatever." And the lady says, "I don't know." So he does some digging, and he finds that it's basically run by a tiny cartel of companies that sort of won't, bring any newcomers in. And so I thought, okay, well, look, it sounds like a story. Let me check it out. And so I do some hunting, and I start calling around the companies and sort of asking, do you know how to get hold of NASASA? And I got this weird lady in the National Ports Authority who gave me the personal number of a high-level manager in Grindrod, who's also on the Durban Chamber of Commerce. And I said to her, "Hi, I'm trying to register my stevedore company, and I haven't blah, blah, blah." And she says, "Oh, no, you don't need to register NASASA. They don't really exist. No one does that anymore." I said, "But the legislation says so, and the National Ports Authority says so. And I've been told by the lady at the National Ports Authority that you're the person to speak to." And then she immediately starts panicking and saying, "Who are you?" And the phone call was, the conversation was very short after that. But that's South Africa for you. We're a cartel economy. It's very hard to get anything done over here. And
and I saw News 24 is a bit behind the curve on that, because I think it was Adrian Basson saying we might be becoming a mafia state. Like we were at risk of becoming a mafia state. So it's like, well, you might be a few years behind the curve on that one.
Speaking of mafia, you read the recent thing on what's it called? There's a big thing that has been dumped on the various sort of main papers, as the main investigative papers, is they've been shown intel files on a massive sort of corruption scheme that's being run out of the president's office. So I don't know if you caught this, but basically it's the journalists were all invited to a little house, and some unknown figure showed them like this big organogram with all of the operators who are extracting resources and doing their business by the feeding trough of Eskom. And I mean, it's really sort of like, okay, well, the president heads this, so not a good look. I'm supposing that we're going to find out in due course, because he says, we've got to wait for legal reasons and so on and so forth. But they say there's four main cartels. That's the presidential cartel, the Mesh Kings cartel, the Legendaries, and the Chief cartel. And I mean, they lay out pretty usual stuff where you do tender fixing and sort of quote, billings fraud and things like that. And then they've also got like, big hit squads that go after people that don't want to play ball. And it does seem to me like we're sort of heading for a major bursting of the bubble. Because I mean, where do people go once Ramaphosa is no longer, your decent, hardworking man who's just really trying
We've
to
known
get
that
the
for such a
ANC
long
back?
time, though. I mean, it's like,
No,
if
but
you haven't realised it by now, I don't think you're ever going to realise it. You're always going to think that way. I mean,
no,
with Pala
it's
Pala,
true.
with all these scandals that have been, I mean, even before he became president, really, I mean, he oversaw the corruption that was taking place during the Zuma years. He went from being a trade union leader to a billionaire. I mean, at some point you've got to connect the dots. I mean, how hard is it really?
Well, I think some people feel like they have to, and I don't think that it's sort of linear like this, like people think in a rational way. I think what happens is that, people do a lot of wishful thinking, and then there's only so much weight of evidence that they can sort of hold at bay before they sort of psychologically cave. And I think that something like this, where it's the president has openly been sabotaging the infrastructure of the country. Once that sort of comes out in full detail, it's really, really going to make it difficult. I mean, look,
But then we're going to see the information warfare, won't we? I mean, it might come out, but then there will be lots of conflicting reports that come out from one side, and that's. I mean, it's not just a. In many
it's
ways,
not what I see in South Africa. That's not what I generally see. The pattern that I generally see with this kind of stuff is that because our media infrastructure is so much smaller, and because we don't have this sort of body of sort of well-trained middle-class people who know what cues to follow, like we do in the West. I mean, look, Western voters can be buffeted about when like the Guardian produces an electoral poll. So, but that doesn't affect politics at all in South Africa. Like, it might affect a few voters in like the southern suburbs of Cape Town, but I mean, like, the broad swathe of South Africans don't read the news, don't care. They know who they're voting for because that's who their dad voted for, their brother voted for, who they voted for last time, or whatever the case may be. And if they vote at all, that is, because we don't even have half of our electorate voting. But the way that I see it is, it's not about the bulk of the population, because they're not going to change much. For me, it's about, where do the elite go? How do they think? How are the upper echelons of the DA thinking? How are the major corporations thinking? How much confidence do certain sort of media environments give people in, say, AfriForum and Solidariteit? Because all of these people, I mean, like, if you know AfriForum and those guys, they are so gentle and conservative with public perception. They're extremely, extremely small c conservative. So they watch out for any kind of they watch out for any kind of tripwires, and they don't push things too far, and they make sure that they don't say anything divisive or anything like that. It's they're very, very tiny windows where they can get like populist sentiment riled up. There's very, very select common ground issues, and so I think, in terms of how organizations get to move and how they build consensus and so on, these kind of revelations are actually very important. And so because it creates a sort of like an obvious consensus platform that people can operate on with ease. Because we're such a fractured society, it's like you need these extremely stable, secure platforms on which to build your rhetoric and your decision making, because without them, you're screwed. I mean, I think the same goes in the ANC, because for the most part, you've got this, it's a very shadowy organization, lots of backstabbing, lots of secrets, lots of factions moving about. And you can't say, there are a lot of things you just cannot say openly. And so it's kind of like that whole Spartacus effect. It's, it's not enough for there to be, for one person to know, for everyone to know something. You have to have everybody know that everybody else knows. And until you've gotten that sort of critical mass broken, you can't really make a decision sort of a complex, fractured organization. So I think even in terms of what the ANC does, this is going to change things. I mean, I think the way that the past presidents sort of changed hands in their second term, this has been driven by those kind of sort of revelations. I mean, with Thabo Mbeki, it was the corruption in the arms deal. That kind of stuff really undermined his grip. And then when he goes after Zuma for this kind of stuff, it's like, okay, well, it's hypocrisy. When Zuma goes down, there's a whole lot of things that made Zuma go down. But I think people just, I think, underestimate how much certainty is required to build consensus. And I mean, the battle that Ramaphosa won in the party in order to get ahead, that was an extremely divisive battle. I mean, the amount of people who got assassinated in order to make that happen, the amount of bribery that had to go on at the branch level, that's not easy fighting. It's not like Zuma taking over from Mbeki. It was very hard fighting.
No, and it was a very close election as well. I mean, it was like a few percentage points in the end.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that, one of the things to bear in mind is, the ANC is not a monolith, and like, when you're from the outside, it can easily look that way because you're thinking, okay, well, they're all communists, they're all black nationalists, and so on. And that's true. And so if you're not those things, they're a united front against you. But on the inside, who gets to run what is the structure we're using, that changes a fair amount. And I think, you can see various sort of changes in policy. And Mbeki liked his monetary policy as a main way of steering things. It was all about balance of payments. He ate into the national reserves in order to pay off debts, but prematurely perhaps. Then, Jacob Zuma with his favor for traditional organizations. He way expanded the powers of traditional leaders. And then, that kind of thing. You get this. You get these very, very different characteristics, and if you know what to look for, they're very different. I mean, like Cyril Ramaphosa, for example. I mean, his historical ties are to the Oppenheimers and to the trade union movements, and so, but his allies in the party are the communists, and so you've got this very strange sort of balance of power where a man who's got no ethnic base is maintaining an allegiance that relies on patronage from so-called white monopoly capital, the old big traditional oligarchs, and then also communists and sort of civil servant apparatchiks and things like that. So I think, that shapes his presidency, because you can look at how he ends up talking out both corners of his mouth. I mean, Jacob Zuma didn't. I mean, his message was extremely consistent, which is why he is so popular. Everyone knew where he stood on every major issue. But no one knows where Ramaphosa stands because he's trying to hold two wild horses pulling in the opposite direction. So, no. I mean, it is a pity. But on the plus side, recent news says the ANC has completely collapsed in the Western Cape.
Ooh, definitely show me that title.
Well, it's not like they don't exist. But
we have seen it for a while. Their branches, I think they barely had many functioning branches in the Western Cape. They kept on having to delay their provincial conference over and over again. They haven't actually had any official leadership in the province for a while. It's quite funny, if you're on Twitter, the thing that annoys Cameron Dugmore the most is when you say that he's the ANC leader in the Western Cape, because he absolutely hates being called that. He'll always correct you and say, oh no, I'm not the ANC leader.
Well, what does he want to be?
I'm the leader of the opposition in the Western Cape. So he makes that very, very clear, even though it's pretty much a meaningless.
But I mean, the thing is that if he wants to, if he wants to sort of draw that line, he's kind of making the case that the Western Cape is a separate entity, really, isn't he? It's like, the opposition party. No, you're only that if the Western Cape's a different country, my friend.
What's the provincial opposition, I guess? The leader of the opposition in the Western Cape Parliament is how he clarifies it. But yeah, I mean, look, I mean, this is what happens when the ANC is removed from powers in areas they never really. I mean, they can get back into power through coalitions, but they can never get back into power as a majority party again. They're always on a steep decline. And look, they went to 20% in the last election.
18%.
18% in Cape, 18% in Cape Town, 20 because the support in the
oh yeah, 25%. Yeah.
It was 20% in the Western Cape, 18% in Cape Town. Who knows where it's going to go to in 2024? Maybe 15%. But yeah,
I'm just sort of scanning. My favorite sort of bit of Schadenfreude was when they failed to hold the provincial conference because they just couldn't find enough delegates. Which is
money.
I mean,
the bank accounts were empty in the Western Cape.
Yeah, I mean it's shocking. I mean, you kind of think that at least keep themselves well fed, but it's.
Well, I mean, look, they've been cut off from a lot of. Look, you'd imagine that maybe the National Party or the other 8 provinces where they're still in power would maybe funnel some money down here. But remember, in virtually all municipalities, I mean, there's no municipality where the ANC has more than 40% of the vote in the Western Cape. And I think they're they're in coalition at the moment in Theowaardskloof. They've been removed in the Cederberg, I think, recently, or they're about to be removed because the coalition is against them. And I think they're in coalition with the PA in a bunch of these central Karoo municipalities and also Knysna. But the thing about it is they're only in control of these municipalities in many cases because they've given the mayorship to the PA. So I think there's only one municipality, and that's Knysna, where they actually have the mayoralty. In almost every other municipality, they don't control the mayorship. So they're just a supporting partner. But yeah, they don't have the access to those municipal or provincial coffers anymore. So they can,
and I mean,
they're pretty much bankrupt.
Yeah, I mean the PA has been making hay while the sun shines. I mean it's extraordinary to watch them because they're a party that's almost entirely composed of retired gang members, and some of their electoral tactics leave much to be desired. And I think, I mean, everyone I've spoken to who knows how they act in negotiations sort of says, well, they really only want, they don't care about your policies. They just want control of the portfolios that have the most lucrative tender options. And then they tell you, we don't care about the rest, take it or leave it. So I think it's really just straight up leverage for looting. That's how I see it. I think they're an absolutely nihilistic party that has no goals in mind whatsoever. But they are a force to be reckoned with.
But I mean, look. What we can hope, maybe. I mean, even though it's maybe a bit of an unfortunate thing to hope for, but they're in control of a number of municipalities. I think their strongest municipality is Beaufort West, where I think they're either the third or second largest party there. But that's where Gayton Mackenzie's been focusing a lot of resources on, a lot of efforts on, been doing all these magnificent projects where no one doesn't know where the money's coming from. And if for elections you start to see,
I hear about these, but I've yet to see any real evidence of this. I mean, there's because when he does have something to post on social media, it's like, okay, well, what we did is we gave an interest-free loan to someone who's opening a bakery. And in the meantime, he talks about all of these grand projects like, they're going to have a transport hub and they're going to have this brick construction industry and all this kind of stuff. And I look at it and go, yeah, but I haven't seen any of it yet. And I mean, I'm curious, if I had contacts there, it would be nice to take a trip and sort of have a look at what they've achieved. But
I read that they also had meetings with donors in Johannesburg, anonymous donors, I think for trying to get funding for some of these projects. But the problem was, I think there was a big concern about the legality of it and the ethical nature of getting private donors for the municipality to try and get these projects going. You can definitely imagine that being abused for other purposes.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I mean, like the party donation structure in South Africa is very, very shady. I mean, like the whole sort of electoral transparency bill, whatever it's called, I can never remember these things. But all the parties have to declare where their donations come from, as long as they're from the outside. But there's a lot that gets made up with donations in kind, as we learned rather recently. So parties like the DA have resources for absolute miles.
I think their budget was $1 billion, 2 billion rands in the 2019 elections. I mean,
insane.
Also, we found out that we heard that they've got like tens of millions of rands of these free goodies that are given to them by private organisations and individuals, like free office space, things like that.
I mean, but what strikes me is that as much money as there is being poured into, as much money as is being poured into the DA, there's a lot of diminishing returns going on. I mean, the sort of decline that they've been seeing in the Western Cape is quite notable. And I think people can tell that they're an impotent party who can't really change anything. And what's really depressing is that they could have changed things. I mean, like, there's so many areas they could have taken control, for at least a decade. They wouldn't have seen any electoral, they would have seen a much reduced decline if they just acted more exigently. I mean, the feet dragging is intense. But I remember a comment that, because I asked Richard Wilkinson about this. If anyone knows who he is, they should check him out on Twitter. His big thing right now, because he's working on a book on what he calls school capture, like state capture and all that. But it's basically how a lot of schools in South Africa are turning over to like critical race theory, transgenderism, all that kind of stuff. Particularly the privileged schools. Sorry, so a comment from Donald down there. Where was I? Not schools. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, Mr. Wilkinson. So he was saying that because he worked as a legal advisor to the DA in Cape Town, and there was a big line that he sort of went off on where he said, the problem is that they get legal advice, and so the mayor will say, "Can we do this?" And then the lawyers say, "No, but you see, like in this bill, it says that's actually responsibility of so and so." And then they go, "Oh, well, then we can't do it." And he said that the difference with, what's his name, Jordan Hill Lewis, is that he approaches this whole thing differently. So he approaches the legal advice department, and they'll say, "You can't do this." And he says to them, "You don't understand. I can read bills myself. That's not what I'm paying you for. I want to do this. You're going to find a way." And I thought, like yeah, I did. I just answering the comment. Yeah, I did get a bit blonde. I've seen a bit more sunshine recently. But anyway, what was I going to say? I was going to say something.
Jordan Hill Lewis,
Oh yeah. I mean, that's why when I spoke to him, you remember in Cape Town during the protest march, for the Eskom protest and everything. The first thing that I did is I complimented him on what he's managed to achieve, because he's the first member of the DA that has actually taken any bloody initiative on areas where the DA sort of don't traditionally control. And the thing is, there's so many areas where they could have taken back power, and it's only this one guy in the whole party who's like trying to move the needle. And so, I mean, like for all my reservations with regards to the other policies he supports, like the coalition with the ANC.
And remember, he was quite, let's remember what he was what he was saying, because he said, I think, two conflicting things when he was speaking to you. Remember, he said maybe we can remove the ANC in 2024, and less than a month later he's saying, well, look, we might have to go into coalition with the ANC. So yeah. I mean, they're all over the place in that position, and my idea regarding the DA in that regard is, I think, especially in the lead up to 2024. They basically, it seems like they've ruled out the possibility that they're going to be leading some multi-party coalition in 2024. They've basically, in many ways, a lot of their own arrogance has collapsed a lot of these coalitions in other parts of the country. I mean, you just have to go and see how they attacked Corne Mulder and the Freedom Front regarding the coalitions collapsing. I mean, everyone can agree, even all the small parties can agree, that the Freedom Front is most of the time the most instrumental coalition partner in bringing everyone together. And then they've basically written that off. We know Helen Ziller said that she'd rather work with the ANC if the DA's got 20% and the ANC's got 40%. She'd rather have that outcome than work with any of the other smaller parties. But I think this is something that's popular among maybe the DA elite and the DA high up leadership. I think once you go down the party, and we know especially at the activist level and the member level, and especially the voter level, people are very horrified when they learn that that's the plan. You just need to show them quotes from Helen Ziller herself. And, there's shock and horror. People don't know how to respond in the DA. And if they continue on along this path, not only do I think they're going to lose support to Cape Independence Party, I think every time they talk about a DA-ANC coalition, the ceiling of support for pro-independence parties just increases and increases and increases. But at the same time, I think you're going to see a backlash internally in the DA from the members, from the councillors, from these people to that idea of a DA-ANC coalition, and especially in the Western Cape. The only option the DA is now leaving their members to support, other than a DA-ANC coalition, is basically self-determination, whether that be autonomy, federalism, and especially Cape independence.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that sort of really lacks at this point is that the Vryheidsfront are the only independence party that seem to have their act together. I mean, if Jack Miller's watching this, I'm sorry, friend, but your party has not achieved the gains that one would expect given what the polling says. So as it stands, we know there's a huge market for Cape independence in the Western Cape, but people are still clinging to the DA because of their fear of the ANC. Look, certainly, I think the prospect of a coalition will tip things a bit. There's still some sort of party loyalists who, when you speak to them, the first thing they react if they hear this news is like outrage and denial, and that says to me that it's something they genuinely fear. But I think the thing is that we really need to see the other two sort of Cape independence parties get their act together, because Vryheidsfront is very, very much Afrikaans. As much as they are still trying to broaden their horizons to the coloured community and the white English community, they're very they're very Afrikaans, and their voter base is very Afrikaans. And if you really want to scoop up those extra votes, you're going to need something that appeals to the English liberals and to the coloured populists. There are vehicles for this, but those parties are underperforming for various reasons, partly due to funding and partly due to organisation.
The Freedom Front does support Cape independence, but in a lot of it depends on the election as well. I mean, on the local election, although we spoke about it in the local elections, it's not the primary issue that's spoken about on the doorstep, because obviously it's a local election. Nothing can really noticeable come out of it for Cape independence, other than maybe some pressure on the DA. But I think especially when you look at 2024 in the Western Cape and the political options that will be emerging for it after those elections, I think Cape independence will definitely rise to the forefront of the campaign. And that is a unifying issue. That is an issue that can bring a lot of those English liberals over, especially if the Freedom Front is the only really main viable independence party, and a lot of those coloured nationalist types who aren't really too keen on the Cape Coloured Congress, because it's very much an urban focused party. They're supporting the rural Western Cape is somewhat limited, although there's a by-election in Barrydale soon where I've heard the Cape Coloured Congress is standing, which could be their first test to see can they actually make inroads in rural areas. But I think the Freedom Front might end up just because the other parties can't get their act together as the main pro-independence party, and that could provide an opportunity to get those other minority groups on board.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, rural voting, it's really weird. I mean, it depends. There are some places where farmers can command the loyalty of the people who work for them. There are some places where that's not the case, where the inverse is the case. And, you know, leveraging rural votes is difficult because, well, people are more spread out. And so, you know, the amount of effort it takes to canvass them, it's extraordinary given how small the votes are here. And there's only two parties that have the sort of funds necessary to achieve this, and that's the ANC and the DA. So gains made
the
by
Freedom Front is doing better gains in the rural areas than they do in Cape Town. I mean, if you look at it, I think there's about nearly 3 or 4 municipalities where the Freedom Front in 2021 was able to exceed 10% of the vote. And their current growth trajectories increase. I mean, take a look at the recent by-election in Agulhas. I mean, that's one of the smallest municipalities in the Western Cape. It was a ward with a large coloured population on one side and a large white population on the other side. And I think the Freedom Front was able to, across the ward, I think it was a 6 to 9% growth. And then in the predominantly white Afrikaans area, it was something like a double-digit growth. And this is in the best-run municipality. It's a coalition municipality, but it's the best-run municipality in the country. And even there was a significant chunk of the DA vote that was taken out of them. So if you look at maybe a more poorly run municipality like Drakenstein, we saw in that by-election that the Freedom Front vote tripled. I mean, it went from a DA majority of 63% to an 8% difference between the Freedom Front and the DA. The vote absolutely collapsed for the DA there. And the significant thing is Drakenstein is the second largest municipality outside of Cape Town. It's the largest municipality in the Western Cape hinterland. And if the gains are much larger there than they are maybe some of these slightly smaller municipalities, then that's quite indicative of where the results could be across the province in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, like I think one of the bigger things over here is that, like, because I am in Drakenstein, that one of the big things here is like the municipality has just so aggressively interfered in any attempt by ordinary citizens to address complaints, and it's like it's on the level where you have your community policing forums. So those are supposed to be independent. But the council won't address them unless they're done according to their protocols, and then they won't address any complaints that come outside of the committees they control. And one of the things is, like, in my area, there used to be, just before I moved in, apparently there was quite a lively neighborhood watch unit. But what happened to them is that they got cracked down on in terms of regulations, and the council refused to provide them with equipment unless they participated in the executive strategy. And it was like, I can't remember the exact reason, but the people found a great deal of issue with this because it wasn't effective. But there's this thing where they don't. The officials are also extremely rude, and I think everyone picks up on this. Is that all of the DA officials in the municipality are the rudest people they've ever met. Like, everyone is ruder than the last one, and it's.
I don't think that's a Drakenstein issue though with the DA. I mean, we saw that on election day with the Gullis, didn't we?
No, those guys are positively angelic by comparison. I mean, it's extraordinary how nasty the people over here are, and there's also this sort of greasy, entitled demeanor that they have that really doesn't help. I mean, I remember my first time that I met the municipal manager, a guy called Cartel Lutz, and he first thing that he did is he boasted that there was an interesting story about how he got hold of the limited edition BMW Z4 that he was driving. And he said, maybe if we get to know each other a little better, I'll tell you how I got it. And I sort of thought, well, like, what are you doing? What the hell do you think you're doing? I mean, who are these people? I don't get it. I don't get it. It's sort of like very nearly ANC demeanor kind of stuff. And the thing
Maybe
is,
that's
like,
why
people
maybe that's why the idea of a coalition is getting easier for the DA to take on.
Oh my soul! No, it's very depressing. I mean,
But just going
one of the
back
worst. Yeah, go
to the
on.
main thing, what was the details of the article about the ANC's collapse in the Western Cape?
So I mean, there was okay. This is I mean, it's very vague, but it's sort of like worrying that worries are growing with the ANC that in the Western Cape, the likelihood that it'll lose more support. And basically, the big thing is that they actually cannot put their branches up anymore. The branch level has collapsed, and I mean, it doesn't take much. It doesn't really take much to run a branch.
We need a lot of
You know,
members, I think, in the ANC to have a branch. I think it's like 100 members in an area.
yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense. I've never looked at those. I've never looked at those regulations myself. But yeah, the thing is that I mean, there's an interesting phrase that for me cropped up, which is the ANC saying one of the ANC councillors said that the weakness of the provincial level means that the party has little authority over the regions and branches or the power to manage the Western Cape dynamics. Now, that I think what that means is because generally speaking, the ANC still runs by the idea of democratic mandates. So, like, if you can mobilize people, if you have a lot of support, they sort of just they give you more. It's a very, very strong one-to-one relationship. And you remember back in the day, before the days of coalition governments up north, there was a big fight over Tshwane. And I can't remember the names of the buggers, but there was the two fellows who wanted to be mayor of Tshwane. One of them had all of the public transport burnt down, and so it was like ANC faction against ANC faction in the streets, burning and causing mayhem. And you know, it's still sort of fought on that level. But if you haven't got enough people to mobilize, it's like the Central Party doesn't like take you very seriously at all. And I think with a guy like Cameron Dugmore,
And
it's
very
an odd.
charismatic.
No, he's not very charismatic. He kind of looks a bit like a parboiled frog, and so he's also a white guy. And I understand, like, oh yeah, no, the people in the Western Cape like voting for white people. Let's give them a white person. And I just,
Yeah,
that's
the
not
thing is,
how it
they
works.
didn't
Like
even.
people,
He was not even the premier candidate going into the election. It was only after the election that they announced that he was their premier candidate when it was going to be the vote in Parliament, which they would obviously lose. And then even it's so weird. Like they didn't even declare him as their mayoral candidate in Cape Town in 2021. He was like the campaign manager or the campaign leader. So he was basically the mayor candidate, but he wasn't officially. Maybe it was because he was white. I don't know. They didn't want to officially give it to a white person, but you know that's the ANC for you. But yeah, he's definitely not someone who can incite people to stop burning things in the street.
yeah. What was that guy? He had a Tony Ehrenreich. No, was it Tony Ehrenreich? The previous guy, the very very sort of short-tempered colored gentleman.
Oh, something Franzman, wasn't it?
I don't think it's Maurice Fransman. I'm sure it was Ehrenreich because I'm talking about like 10 years ago.
Okay.
And he was the ANC's guy. And he was a lot younger than Dugmore is right now, and he would organize all kinds of crazy protests and stuff. And he didn't make himself very popular because I mean it sort of backfired. Because I think one of the things down here is that people just don't like to be bothered. They just don't like to be sort of harassed, and so all of the rabble rousing that goes on up north, it just doesn't fly here, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's. I think that with the ANC, they tried to make the Western Cape ungovernable, and in the end, they've made themselves ungovernable. That's really the story of the ANC in the Western Cape.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that the Western Cape just wants to be governed really hard. I think I think the resistance to sort of popular violence demonstrates this. I mean, the only people who really engage in sort of big scale violent acts are, like the taxi cartels. Everything else is sort of like diffuse organized crime stuff. So it doesn't strike me as likely that we're going to get. I mean, because look, both of us have now got a little bit of experience in sort of politics now, and we've seen how hard it is to move the needle with any crowd. And down here, it's just like nobody feels the vibe very strongly, no matter what you're selling them. Everyone just wants to get about their business, So I don't know. I think everyone's just sort of watching and waiting for someone to do something. So yeah,
No matter,
remains
someone
to be
will
seen.
do something before 2024. I think
Bloody
somewhere in
hell,
the
I really,
country there will be a big story. Look,
I bloody
you
hope
see
so.
ESCOM. Yeah, I mean, look, you just need to look what's happening at ESCOM. The blackouts, the possibility of grid collapse there. There's so many areas where just a fire can start and then it can turn into a complete bushfire. You just have
I
to wait
know.
and see what happens. But I mean, look, I mean,
Yeah,
maybe to finish us off, I mean, I've got quite an interesting story just to show another aspect of life where governance has collapsed in this country. My mum was trying to go for a police clearance certificate for a job. She applied for the certificate in November, got confirmation of receipt in December, was told in beginning of February, we've received it's been finalised. The police certificate's been finalised. It will be sent out by the police service's own priority courier service to the local police station within a week. And if you don't hear from if you don't see it, if you don't hear about it, contact them in a week's time and they'll sort it out. None of SAP's numbers to its head office work. You can't get a hold of SAP's head office. If you go onto their website, try and call one of those numbers, they're not working at the moment. Either it will be constantly occupied, or it will just ring constantly and then the call will end. And the worst thing is, not even the local SAPS office that uses those numbers was able to get a hold of the head office. So they're a bit stuck at the moment. They can't get a hold of head office in the Cape. My mum can't get a hold of them. They're also their online application form for inquiry form doesn't work. No response to that. The email they provide on the website, no one responds to the emails. So the head office's communication service has completely collapsed, it seems. And I don't know when it's going to be operating again, but no one really seems to be talking about it at the moment. And also, there was an article, I think it was in the Sowetan, where it said something like 44% of police stations or 40% of police stations in South Africa don't respond to phone calls or don't answer the phone when there's a call. So it's just completely collapsed the communications with SAPs, and that's a very disturbing thing to hear.
yeah. I mean, I think like for a long time now, we've had a situation where nobody goes to the police for anything. It's there's not you have like some rubber stamp stuff that they have to do, like the stuff that you're describing. But aside from stamping a couple of documents, no one goes to the police. I mean, there's some pro forma stuff you do for when something's stolen for insurance purposes, but no one
Or when
expects
there's
them
a
to
car
lift a finger.
accident.
Right, right. Just
I
before we
mean, like I
go,
remember, yeah.
just before we go, I just want to quickly have a look at any questions from the chat. It probably won't be too many because it seems like people have been chatting amongst themselves. But I thought I'd give them a little bit of a voice because we're nice and small, so pretty much any question can really be dealt with. Yeah. Well, firstly, Donald dipped in to say why there are no South Africans on the panel. But Andy Winsor, he asked who funds the DA. Is it Soros, the World Economic Forum? And the answer is no. The answer is that it's predominant. The biggest donor is the Oppenheimer family. So Mary Slack Oppenheimer gives $15 million every year. So, for anyone who doesn't know, the Oppenheimer family are one of the oldest sort of oligarchic families in South Africa. They were handed most of our mining infrastructure in the 1920s after J.P. Morgan bankrolled them to do so, and they made a fair bit of money doing some very interesting stuff. So in the 1980s, they funded both the divestment and sanctions movement overseas, the ANC in exile, and the National Party. And that particular combination exacerbated the situation and kept the pressure on the government. But what it also did is it caused lots of international companies to pull out of South Africa. So all of their assets went at fire sale prices. And by the end of the 80s, there's a book called South Africa Inc. It's incorporated about their practices. And this is like at the end, by 1987, they had direct or indirect control over 80% of the formal economy. So that's their level of control in society, in this country. And what they did in 2003 is they lobbied the ANC to put BEE into practice. They wrote the legislation themselves through their foundation, the Brenthurst Foundation. And then 9 years later, they divested from all of their mining interests. And so now they give money to the DA. Now that everything's thoroughly wrecked. But you can sort of see, like, you get the BEE thing rolling and everyone else has to pull out except for interests who are already inside the cartel. So I've yet to see exactly what they really want from the DA. But the one time that I did speak to Helen Zille in person, I asked her about this. And she said that they have no influence whatsoever. So I guess that's case closed. So there's a lot of people sort of offering. What's the likelihood of these bubbles bursting within the year? Well, I think there's a lot of things that are coming for us in the year. I think the grey listing might move things along a little bit because you'll get a lot more scrutiny on financial transactions in South Africa from international sort of people, which makes it that you probably will see a lot more articles about South African corruption or corrupt deals with South African government by foreign businesses. There might be more articles that you'll see in international newspapers about ISIS having ties here, things like that. But that's not really a bubble.
Well, we were grey listed just recently.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The grey listing will precipitate a lot more of this. But I think the big bubble that's going to burst is probably Eskom. The other one that's and attached to that is the whole corruption scandal. When those details come out, the fact that it includes the president is like, again, I really think that's going to move the needle quite substantially. And look, Ramaphosa has won his leadership challenge, but no president of the ANC has lasted for 2 terms. So the likelihood that he'll get shoved out of office after getting re-elected is very high. He already has a lot of enemies. So, it's just going to look really messy this year. I think I don't think there's any sort of real big thing that'll tick over unless what happens is that, all of the water reticulation in Gauteng breaks, which is very likely. I mean, if pumps don't run long enough, due to the blackouts. So there's a likelihood that you're going to sort of see like a real humanitarian crisis emerging there. Because, I mean, like day zero in the Cape and in, PE was pretty big. But when it happens in Gauteng, which is a place that has plenty of water, everyone's going to brick themselves because, where are those people going to go? I mean, some of them are going to come to the Cape, but most of them, there's just nowhere to go. I mean, how do you even get here from there?
We saw that in the Durban riots, for example. I remember seeing pictures from the airports of people just like the flights from Durban to Cape Town were fully booked. People just like, it was like a refugee situation. People just trying to flee to safety.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember I had to bail out my aunt because times were tough. No one could work. Everyone's paying inflated prices, waiting around the corner with their proof of address in hand. Yeah, that's that was pretty rough. On the plus side, you'll get a bunch of very hard-necked people coming here who've got very strong opinions about how the rest of the country's run, which could be a start. And then from our, loyal representatives at Worldview, we've got the question here: what is Cape independence? Is it the answer, the key, the fix, the cure, the escape? I mean, yeah, I think it is. I mean, obviously, both of us on this channel are well aware, on the same page about this. We're both pro Cape independence. We think this is a viable country with its own character. It's got nothing in common with the rest of the country, really, and we don't want to be run by their shenanigans anymore. And we're perfectly capable of surviving on our own and making the most of things. And if we don't do it, we are headed for a very nasty fiscal cliff, and we will be dragged down with the rest of the economy. And that's just, we can't have that now.
Well, I think as Phil Craig puts it, we have a problem that only Cape independence can fix. I think that's the way he phrases it.
Well, he's always come up with these lovely glib phrases that work really, really well for media sound bites. He's very good at it. If you follow the Cape Independence Twitter account, it's like slick headline after slick headline. It's there's never anything spicy, just always something that looks very professional.
Occasionally the spicy topic.
Well, I mean, look, it's not compared to my Twitter timeline, which I think most people are well aware that I push a lot of buttons for people. But we have someone who says, Yaku Dutoy over here says, what do we think of Rob Hasselhoff? Would you like to field that one for a minute? Because I have my opinions.
I mean, look, I think he's quite the opportunist, isn't he, when it comes to South African politics? I mean, he's spoken in favour of, every party possible, really. I mean, look, he's on the DA side. I think that's been a pretty consistent thing. But he's been involved in the business sector. I think he's a disruptor, and anything that's going to disrupt the ANC's, rule in part of the country or across the country, he's on board with. And if it helps boost his profile, that's even an added benefit.
Yeah, no, I think he likes the sound of his own voice a lot. But
I think he wants to be South Africa's Donald Trump.
Yeah, no, but he's the wrong color, I'm afraid. I mean, look,
he's got the right hair color.
Yeah, look, he's a very intelligent guy. He's got a lot of energy for his age. But I think he's got really, really poor political instincts. I mean, remember, until very recently, he was still going, railing about how Mmusi Maimane was going to save South Africa. It's like, how does anyone take you seriously when you say things like that?
Did you see Mmusi Maimane said that his party is going to try and gain 600,000 votes in the Eastern Cape alone and become the official opposition there? And hopefully lead a multi-party coalition government that can oust the ANC in the Eastern Cape.
That'll be some trick.
Yeah, but I think if you can do that, you can do it anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the strongest area for ANC support anywhere in the country, which is probably why they're suffering so much. But I mean, the thing is, I do worry about how these coalitions pan out, particularly when it's with I've noticed the parties that are composed of ex-DA members, really, they can't find common ground ever. And I keep thinking of Michael Beaumont. I mean, that's so for anyone who's not following, who doesn't know who Michael Beaumont is, I can't remember what his position is at Action SA.
He's like the chairperson of Action SA.
Yeah. He's something high up. I can never remember the offices, but he's he's their great white hope who sits under the dear leader Hanan Mashaba, and his departure from the DA, it comes with a lot of personal notes. So John Steenhuisen, it turns out, was stripping his wife and then married his wife. And Beaumont recently gotten clearly happily married with someone else, but I don't think an injury like that goes away. And he particularly seems to get very worked up on Twitter when something about John Steenhuisen comes up. So I think, I can't imagine. I can't imagine what it must be like in negotiation rooms with those people. It cannot work out well, and I think particularly with so there's sort of like a World Economic Forum aligned Black liberal crowd and Brenthurst Foundation aligned crowd. So like the Rivonia Circle with Songezo Zibi and Lindiwe Mazibuko and what's that nutcase from she's got an Afrikaans surname, Phumzile van Dam. Really short-tempered, really sort of irrational person who, and I mean, like you look at all these people, and when you read what they've got to say in public about the DA, you can tell that they're nursing very bitter personal wounds, not realizing the reason they were kicked out of the party is that they wouldn't back the non-racialist principle. They wanted to sort of do well. BEE is a good in theory. We just need to tweak some of the parameters, So. You get some. That's what that crowd's sort of made of, and Musi Maimane is no exception. So he likes BEE. He just thinks somehow he can be made to work if you get the parameters right, which sounds to me like wishful thinking at best. But I think the problem is that that's going to be a major chafing issue. Is that they're going to constantly be feeling, we're the victims here. The DA is the white party. Blah blah blah. So. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a very happy team. But we have another question from Andy Vinsar. It says, what do we predict when the ANC DA coalition happens? But I mean, first of all, I'd say chances will happen are, and what leverage do they have? It's a leverage question. I mean, look, the DA or the ANC are going to slip below 50% in the coming election by all counts. What do the DA have to offer them? They're going to say, like, okay, well, we think you should abandon all of your core policies and let us prosecute you for corruption. Like, who thinks this is going to work? Who thinks this is going to work? It's not. I mean, because they're going to say, well, that's very nice. But we have two other people we can go for, IFP and EFF, and we don't have to listen to you and your nonsense, your white tendencies. And, so what are you going to give us? Oh, well, especially if you think like the DA is absolutely, it's absolutely necessary for him to get into this coalition, get into the government. How much are they willing to give up? I mean, are they willing to give up their stance on BEE? Maybe. They're willing to give up their stance on independent corruption tribunal? Quite possibly. What about EWC? I mean, maybe they'll be able to get some sort of nominal concessions over there, but, that's coming whether we like it or not. And I think, at the end of the day, if they get into power, whatever arrangement they'll make, immediately both of the parties will be seen as sellouts by their core voters. ANC will see massive droves defecting to the EFF. DA will see massive droves defecting to, well, everyone else. And, the party will be done for because the one thing that makes them worth voting for is now gone. And that means that you will have splintered everything, and there'll be no sort of common ground for forming political coalitions at the local level. It'll just be sort of rotating, horse trading, which means lots more corruption, lots more ineffectiveness. And then at the national level, you'll now have this sort of stable centrist coalition partner that can't get anything done, and that no one can vote out of power. It's just like the worst of all worlds. And like no one, the kind of reforms that they need to do in order to keep us from going full Zimbabwe is like cut 30% of the national budget. It's like, I mean, like no one has the stones to do that, even with like full representation. You try and speak to a DA rep and say, are you going to cut 30% of the budget? Are you going to, like, no. I spoke to Songizwe Zibi. I got very lucky. There was a Sowetan space that was held at an awkward hour. So there was like 15 people in the chat. And so I punched my way up the queue and asked him directly, okay, here's my maths on when I think the fiscus is going to hit a hyperinflation/debt default sort of situation based on historical patterns from other countries. And here's how much of the budget we need to lose in order to avoid that. And he says, yes, no, I can see that. I know we're headed for that. But we can't cut welfare because we actually need to increase welfare because people are desperate. And then he says, we can't privatize the state-owned enterprises because no one wants to invest in them. They're toxic assets. So you go, okay, well, great. So the DA wants to go and take on this challenge. Sounds tickety-boo to me. They sound, really, really rational and well-grounded, don't they? I mean, I'm sure you see most of the same things I do in this regard.
Yeah, I think we've got very similar. We follow a lot of the same people on Twitter, for example, so we see a lot of the same stories.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, I think also, your in-person contacts are very similar. So, I mean, like, I think, you've got a somewhat better eye for, you can always, you've got a fantastic memory for like all of the officials, who's doing what are their policies, how's this run, institutional rules. I can never remember that stuff. It doesn't seem to me like there's much way out of this. There's some big ticket stuff that they can't deal with. It's the ground.
Well, the only option for Tilly say part of South Africa is just self-determination. That's what we keep on repeating.
Yeah, I mean, something that's perhaps for another stream, if we can look into some detail, would be, other efforts at self-determination. Like what's happening in Zululand, what's happening in the Afrikaner enclavist, efforts, things like that. Because I mean, certainly that's a whole rabbit hole to go down, and there's a lot of ins and outs there. But I mean, there's one last question. Oh, there's two more questions, which is lovely. So just the two, and then we will check out. Someone asking, Oppenheimer and Zilla both from the same tribe. Yes, I believe so. Yeah. Then there's someone called Driefreet saying, what do you make of Gayton McKenzie and Fadil Adams? I feel like Gayton is in bed with the ANC to garner the coloured vote, much like Good. I don't think so. I think the thing is people misunderstand, and I think I've fallen into this trap myself. Mark, why are you late? It's inexcusable. What are you going to be like as a representative, my friend? If you watch from the beginning, I was talking smack about Pretoria. Come on, man, you don't need to talk smack about Pretoria. Pretoria smacks itself, and it's not great. But someone says here, what do you make of Gayton McKenzie? Look, Fadil Adams and Gayton McKenzie are totally different kettle of fish. Totally different. They both say a lot of spicy things in public, but Fadil Adams means what he says. And he's a real ideologue, and he really does love his people. He is completely disorganized, doesn't know how to run contacts, and doesn't know how to run his party administratively. And here's the thing, he's actually aware of this. So he'll say, I'm not the guy who's going to lead this stuff, but there's no one else doing anything. So that's his approach. And I mean, he does incredible things. So he like the hunger strike and all of the other protests that he gets involved in, he makes a lot of personal sacrifices. Now, you're never going to see Gayton McKenzie make a personal sacrifice. I mean, a lot of people will
Especially
talk about the fact that he... No. Well, I mean, he'd have a lot to... He has a big paunch to work his way through if he does that. But look, Gayton McKenzie... The thing is, some people will make a big of a deal that he forewent his mayoral salary. But in comparison to what he'll make up in terms of tenders and the businesses he's got on the side, it's a drop in the bucket, and it's an easy gesture for him to make. And so the thing about Gate McKenzie is that the Patriotic Alliance and the Cape Colored Congress do different things. Patriotic Alliance is, well, whatever he thinks the people want to hear, and then he'll work with anybody. And the thing is that one has to bear in mind the colored mentality here is they know they're not black enough and they know they're not white enough. So they have a mentality where they can't feel a natural extreme to gravitate towards. So there are some things that you'll find colored populations are very, very big on law and order, tend to be quite conservative culturally, even if in practice there's a lot of, how should I put it, very libertine behavior. But that's largely due to breakdown of communities and things. Oh dear, sorry, my father chipped in with a comment. He says, someone got into trouble here in the UK for noting the nurses on a picket line should rather be on hunger strike. Yeeks. Well, I'll tell you what, one thing that you can do if you really, really want to prove that you mean what you say, hunger strikes will do it. Hunger strikes will definitely do it, because it's very obvious discomfort, and it's sort of, everyone associates it instinctively with sort of Christian asceticism. And so it's like, well, here comes Saint so-and-so.
Remember, it was really important for Gandhi in his fight for Indian self-determination.
Oh, yeah, big time. And I mean, like the Irish as well. So, I mean, look, I think I would like to see Fadil Adams become a bit more comfortable, like find a place in the party. I would like to see him find someone who's a good administrator, who can run the party. So that's really the key problem. It's I think that's really the issue. Is he just needs a good administrator in the party, and they'll do well. I mean, they already gained with the sort of scattershot effort they had in the inner city. They managed to make some fairly serious gains in.
Well, they're effectively the second largest party in Mitchell's Plain at this point. I mean, from one election, in their first election, they come second place in Mitchell's Plain. I mean, that isn't exactly nothing. And I mean, look, as I said, there's a by-election in Barrydale. I've been told the Cape Colour Congress is contesting it. So it will be interesting to see what inroads they can now make in rural parts of the province.
Yeah, well, look, I wish them
unorganized, campaigns can actually make the same inroads that they've seen in the urban areas.
Well, I wish them all. I wish them all the best, because I mean, look, they have some scary rhetoric, and I think they do lean fairly sort of national socialist, shall I say? But on the other hand,
right wing, really.
Yeah, the best way to put it is they're populists. They're populists, and so I mean, look, they're coloured nationalists, right? So there's that socialism and the ethno-nationalism kind of going hand in hand.
What you see in Europe, I guess, with a lot of these right-wing parties like the National Rally. I mean, Marine Le Pen's party, very nationalist on a lot of the social issues, very left-wing on a lot of the economic issues, and overall a populist party.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the thing is that I'd be far more willing to work with them, because, like, while they might be a bit, let's just say they're very colourful. On the other hand, it's very obvious that they're not just in it for the money, and they do actually give a damn. And so, I do wish them well, and I hope they eat into the Patriotic Alliance's base as much as they possibly can.
Yeah.
I think there was
rather have the Cape Colour Congress and the Patriotic Alliance.
That's true. And there was another comment. There was another part of that question which mentioned good. And when I speak to good supporters, they don't really see themselves as working for the ANC. They don't really like the ANC. And if I look at Patricia de Lille's track record, she really is running the party as a personal vehicle. she doesn't really have a fixed idea of what she stands for herself. She just sort of she has a vague idea of what she wants, but most of it is the same old radical leftist stuff. But she does sort of prefer hewing to her own people more than other groups. And I think I think this is again a feature of colored politics where people are there. If you're not talking to them, it doesn't make sense because you can't. It's like, well, oh, are you with the ANC or are you with the DA? Who? Well, they're trying to find their own niche, really. And the problem is that there aren't any real big political ideas that are, it's not a population where sort of nuanced conversation of sort of electoral politics is a big thing because people are very jaded, they're very distrusting. And so I think in some way, if the party has a cynical streak or a very radical streak, that appeals because it says, well, you know what, we're the get shit done party, and we're not really concerned with trying to, bullshit you about, whatever sacred paradise we're going to bring in the next era, because they know no one's going to buy that. They're going to say, well, we are here to get things done, and we're going to do it by hook or by crook. And then that message sells. And what I found because we're white fellas, I find when engaging with colored people who are politically minded, you get a better grip if you're frank about the fact that you're actually pursuing your own interests. Whereas, people vote for the DA to a certain extent, but when you poke them about it, they'll say, yeah, but it's run by white people and it's for white people, but it's better than the ANC. So they'll do one of those. And there's a lot of feeling of betrayal. There's a lot of feeling of abandonment, and I think they might be healthy in the long run if they find their own voice. The trouble is they haven't had their own political units since Griqualand was collapsed into the Union over 100 years ago. So getting their own political representation again, maybe we'll have a clearer picture of what their real character is politically over time.
It's maybe the first generation really of Cape coloured orientated parties that we're seeing at the moment. And as time goes on, the new generations will emerge, and we'll come to a new type of political system then.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing more coloured intellectuals emerging, because at the moment it's been so, I mean, we've got Athol Williams is about the closest we've got at the moment, but he's currently in exile for, getting too close to ANC corruption. And, he's a whistleblower. And, it's very sort of liberal internationalist stuff that he supports, which, I understand. I mean, one of the big things that you find in the colored community is that they are, with the exception of the segment that Fadil's trying to appeal to, is they they tend to be very liberal on race issues. So a lot of it's a thing that a lot of people don't quite grasp is this combination of very liberal on race issues, very reactionary on social issues and crime. So yeah, it's an interesting mix. And it could work out to be sort of a good trend, a good sort of moderating influence for some of the crazier things that we generally have seen in South Africa at large. We're moving to Cape independence, but so the Driefreet down here said an interesting note. They said having a chat with Fadil, so they only had 70K to spend on their campaigns leading up to the local elections in 21. And getting 8 seats is, it is impressive for that little pocket of money.
I think they were like the fourth or fifth largest party in Cape Town.
Yeah, it's like if you're in international politics and you tell someone that they got 8 seats in the big one of the most important cities in the country by spending the equivalent of
£3,500.
Yeah, not even. It's like no one will believe you. Like it's just crazy. Yeah. But coming up for 2 hours. I think it's time to clock out. Been very fortunate with the load shedding. But yeah, we'll see you all next week, and hopefully there'll be some exciting developments in the news for us to pick through.
Maybe we'll even have a guest. Who knows?
Oh yeah, that'll be nice. Yeah. Maybe we can make it a nice roundtable chat. It'll be good. Anyways, good night, everybody.